everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Chop It Up Sports. The format is a little different today, but we do have alongside me Kaleb Unger, friend of the pod, friend of mine. Back in our roots here down in the basement of the media comm department here at Northwest Nazarene. How's it been, man?
It's been good, just decided to shoot up here real quick before I started my new job, and we're rolling.
Where are we working at now? Is it Montana?
Yeah, back in Montana, working on a newspaper, hopefully.
Nice.
Get that rolling.
Good stuff. Yeah, what has been the process like post-collegiately? Also, because obviously, NNU doesn't have a great communication department in terms of sports media and mediated communication. It's more centered towards your traditional organizational communication. So how has that adjustment been trying to find a job that's maybe not focused around what you were learning about here?
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting because I have a lot of the raw skills that you would want in those things, some of the public speaking and things like that, the media communications, the base stuff that you get is good. But most interviews I go into, they're kind of just okay, so we're gonna have to teach you stuff. You have the base level, but it's almost like you're an intern that you're but I need money.
Yeah. No, that's the annoying part about here is there's that sense of purpose that you're taking classes that are centered around your degree. But I mean, right now I'm in rhetorical theory and communication research. And so I'm learning about how the Romans and Greeks were, trying to persuade people, and I could care less about that. I want to talk about football. And luckily that's what we are going to talk about. AFC, NFC Championship games just wrapped up today. We'll start with the NFC. That was the first of the two games today. Philly absolutely beat down the Commanders at the Link. We'll get your thoughts on this. We'll let you go first as the guest. What were your takeaways?
I think it just comes down to the fact that the Eagles just out physicaled them.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a team that was more experienced with that kind of football. I think it's really interesting to look at that that Lions game and to think, was it part of it in the dome? That was the perfect conditions for Jaden Daniels to sort of do his thing, to kind of run all over the place, that defense to fly around. And then they played an Eagles team that's really good on both the defensive front line and the offensive front line. And then they kind of showed up and we kind of saw what they really were. Also, they didn't have De'Aaron Payne, which I feel had to really hurt them.
Yeah, I feel what I noticed first thing out of the gate is just the athleticism up front with Philly. And even without Nakobe Dean, having those guys like Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith, and obviously in the secondary, the exciting Whites, Rodrigo Blankenship and Cooper DeJean, who we saw make some plays today as well. I just think that this Philly team is so dynamic on both sides of the ball. Obviously, first play of the game on offense for the Eagles, Saquon takes it 75 yards to the house. And that's really what this Eagle team is all about. They're explosive, but at the same time, they play a almost old school complementary style of football. So it's really a combination of old school smash mouth football, but they just have the star power on both sides of the ball to, destroy teams, and that's exactly what we saw today. Let's talk about the Commanders a little bit. It was Jaden Daniels. It's his rookie year. He had a great performance. I actually thought he was somewhat solid today. What did you see from him?
Yeah, I thought he looked really good. I think they're a team that's used to playing in these really close games. I mean, obviously the Buccaneers game was really close, and that Lions game was close until they started to pull away. And I just don't know if they were ready for that brand of football of being okay, we're down 14 and now we got to get back into it. And they just seemed like a really young team that is probably going to sort of build off of this loss in the future. I think because they're already ahead of schedule, there's a lot of cause to be excited about what they can do next. But I think overall they just kind of looked like they got punched in the mouth, and then they just could never really claw their way back despite playing solid football and scoring 25 points.
Yeah, and the issue with that is that when you have a rookie quarterback, no matter how good he is, and obviously Jaden Daniels was fantastic this season, but there's still that sense of consistency, and you have to stay within the system. When you have a rookie quarterback, you're not going to be able to get outside of the playbook too much. And I think because of that, like you said, when Philly starts to take that 14-21 point lead, the Commanders stayed in it. They made some plays. They got some stops defensively. But on the flip side of that, they also had 4 fumbles and 4 turnovers, 3 fumbles, and each one of those fumbles resulted in a touchdown for Philly. And so when you're shooting yourselves in the foot like that, there's just no chance you're going to make a comeback, especially when you're on the road. And I think the weirdest part about that is that there were some athletes or some players on the Commanders that looked like deer in the headlights, but for one of those guys to not be the rookie quarterback was really interesting. For me, Austin Eckler looked like a guy who wasn't really ready for the moment. He just didn't show up today. He didn't look great. He wasn't that effective in the running game. He had a couple fumbles. and to see the veterans that have helped this team be so successful struggle a little bit. I know Zach Ertz had a massive game, but it was just kind of interesting to see the rookie look the most composed out of all the veterans that have been on that team. But Philly advances. I really think offensively they can really be dangerous, but it starts with the run game for them. I mean, Saquon was a monster today. Jalen Hurts, I feel like he's inconsistent. Some days I watch him, I'm like, man, this guy's fantastic. I thought he was good today, not great. But what did you see from him?
I think I love their offense because you kind of talked about they play like that old school style of football, but it's got like, Kellen Moore's creativity from being in like those different like Cowboys offenses and Boise State offenses. So he does want to play that like smash mouth football, but there's also some of that like aspect of like read option and like spreading everything out. And I mean, they have their third receiver is a former first round pick, and then Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. It's like, how do you really compete with that? And then it's like, okay, we'll cover those guys. Oh, we'll just give it to Saquon. And so I think as long as Jalen Hurts can continue to be a really good, facilitator, he doesn't have to win games for them. He doesn't have to put the team on his back. And if he can facilitate, like, they're going to keep playing extremely well. I think it's when Jalen Hurts tries to play outside of himself that you start to see, some of that Eagles problems and the turnovers and things like that.
I think a lot of that credit, just with the construction of this Eagles team, has to go to Howie Roseman, just because early on with the Jalen Hurts experiment, it was a lot of, they bring in A.J. Brown, they draft Devontae Smith. Like you said, at that time, they have Zach Ertz and some of these guys. And so, a lot of it was trying to get Jalen Hurts to be comfortable throwing the ball. We all knew he was athletic based on what we saw with him in college, but they're really trying to force him to throw the ball. And, after that Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs especially, we saw that, it's not that he's a bad passer, but he can be just as effective on his legs as he can in the passing game. And so for Howie to recognize that and bring in a caliber running back like Saquon, because up until that point, they really haven't had anyone that is that effective of a running back. They've always kind of had it by committee after LaShawn McCoy, which was at this point, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was. So to bring in Saquon and to be that aggressive in free agency to go get a guy from a division rival, I know it was a skeptical decision by a lot of people early on, kind of, there's people out there that didn't think it was going to be effective, and there's just too much star power in that room. But I just think the ability to switch things up and say, we're going to rely on the run game first and allow that to open up our passing game with our dynamic receivers has really been the difference, because we've seen them have success even last year, especially in the first half of the season. They were fantastic with Jalen Hurts throwing the ball. Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown had career seasons. But ultimately, when it came time to win playoff games, they just weren't able to do that. And so bringing Saquon just has completely restructured their offense. And to me, it's really impressive. Do you feel like going forward and looking at the NFC East, obviously the Cowboys bring in Brian Schottenheimer, Eagles, Commanders, we just see them in the conference championship. The Giants are a disaster. But how do you see this division going in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Giants it really depends, and like right now it's sort of a crapshoot. Like, will Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders be something that they can build off of if they get one of those quarterbacks? If not, can they get a bridge quarterback that can help them move in the right direction? For me, the Giants feel like they're in sort of like a suspended animation, because it's like they bring back the GM, they bring back Dable, and it just feels like you're bringing these guys back to probably be fired next year, instead of just like realistically resetting. And then, I mean, the Cowboys, I don't understand that hire. Like,
no sense. Makes no sense.
He's been a solid offensive coordinator his entire time, but there's a reason that he's never really gotten like head coach interviews. His dad's an all-time great head coach for sure, but he's just been a solid offensive coordinator, and so I don't think that translates into being a good head coach, especially with the way that this roster is right now. And I think you're looking at like a Commanders-Eagles struggle over the next couple of years, but I think the fact that they have Saquon locked down for so long, that Howie Roseman continues to do this thing where he'll like draft like a Georgia player and stash him and kind of develop him for 2 years, and then you get a guy like Nakobe Dean, and just his eye for talent. I can't think that the Eagles would fall behind the Commanders at any point, even with how dynamic Jaden Daniels is. I just think it'll be a lot of wild card action for the Commanders.
I want to hit on the Giants real quick, because we were talking about Shedeur and Cam Ward. Are you pro Shedeur? Are you pro Cam? Are you both? Where do you stand on those guys?
So it's really funny. I stand with my guy, Colin Cowherd, where he makes, and I agree 100%, but it's the wild take that Cam Ward looks small, but Shedeur Sanders doesn't, and they're like the same size. Mm-hmm. Like, when I watch Cam Ward, I'm just like, I just am not impressed. I remember watching them play Cal, and being like, this can't be an NFL quarterback, like a guy that's going to lead a franchise. But I like the prospect of Shedeur. I'd almost like Shedeur more if I knew he could like sit, like do like a sort of Drake May or Michael Penix thing where you get like that like 4 to 8 weeks before you get to take the field. But I'm way more of a Shedeur guy, and I'm a lookout for Jackson Dart guy.
I'm going to push back. I'm a little bit of a Cam Ward guy. Obviously, there are some things in Miami that I didn't love. Like in the NFL, you're not going to be able to sit in the pocket for 18 seconds and just kind of hang out back there and just chill out and kind of do your own thing. Because, I mean, Cristobal allowed him to do whatever he wanted. I mean, Cam ran that program inside and out. And with Shedeur, I think there's obviously things that I do like. I think his ability to be mobile and extend plays, not to, channel my inner Tony Romo, but he does look a little Mahomesy in certain areas of just his ability to scramble outside of the pocket, but he's not the most athletic guy we've ever seen. I'm just interested to see how he kind of handles the adversity of being on a team that's not great without his dad, because obviously that first year in Colorado, they weren't fantastic, but they knew that they had talent coming in. His dad was there. Travis Hunter was there. It'll be interesting to see how he kind of adapts to being on his own for the first time in his career. And for me, Cam, he just kind of strikes me somewhat as a guy who can stay composed in situations like that, where I could see Shedeur kind of turning into a hothead. I think overall, I'm not super high up on either guy, just in terms of what we've seen in years past in drafts like last year, where you have Kaleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May going back to back to back. I think all three of those guys are going to have some form of success. I wouldn't be surprised if in 3 to 4 years we're looking at Shedeur and Cam Ward, and they're both potentially on their way out of whatever organization drafts them. I just think it's not that deep of a draft. I think you can get better value from 5 to 15 than you can from 1 through 4. That's just my take on it. At least quarterback-wise, I think it'll be pretty interesting.
Okay, so say we flash back to last year, right? And so you don't know anything about how the quarterbacks play this year. Would you put Shedeur or Cam Ward ahead of any of those 6 quarterbacks?
Probably not. I
Which is
don't think that I
crazy.
would. Yeah, it is wild that the top 2 quarterbacks this year wouldn't be in the top 5 or 6 this year, but I don't see a world where that's a possibility.
Yeah, I think they seem like later round quarterbacks, like in other years, like kind of that year when like Derek Carr and Teddy Bridgewater got taken late with that Blake Bortles, so like way far away. But like they seem more like those kind of quarterbacks that you'd be like, wow, I'm really glad I got this guy in the 20s, but instead you're drafting them at like 2 or 3. And I think to your Cam Ward take, with him kind of running that program in the same way, he's going to come into a place where he has a good offensive system where maybe that won't be put on him as much. Like Herbert's a great example of, he played in a Mario Cristobal system, and it's just not always the best. Like he's a great recruiter and he's a really solid, like, front 7 coach, but once you get back to the quarterbacks and the skill positions, he's an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Washington dominated Cristobal. I wasn't there. My brother was there. His first game against Washington, 70-21. Herbert went to our rival high school. It was his first career start. Threw a pick first play of the game.
70-21.
Shout out Buda Baker.
That's wild.
Let's switch it back to the AFC Championship game. Neither one of us probably really are excited to talk about, but it is kind of our duties because it's going to be the title of this show. The Chiefs get it done once again. 3rd straight appearance for the boys in Kansas City. It was a back and forth game. I feel like it's what we see every time with these teams, including the questionable officiating, which I don't want to hit home too much, but I mean, there was just some terrible calls in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just some tough stuff. Like, obviously, the catch is going to be a big one. That's like a toss-up play. There's just, the ball doesn't move a ton, so you're kind of like, I don't know. But there was definitely just some stuff where it was like, I was actually watching it with some of my friends, and it's just that idea, even that anytime Mahomes would throw the ball and it looked like he was maybe getting sacked or hit, and the camera would move away, you'd be like, oh my gosh, they're probably gonna throw a flag. Or on a 3rd down, it would be like, you'd wait a second, and then they'd be like, oh, there's a flag on the field, and you're just like, oh my gosh. And it just seemed like it always went against the Bills in the bigger moments.
I feel like it's actually starting to have a visual effect of defensive players, especially on the defensive line within the game, because, when you see those guys start to get to Mahomes, at least from what I noticed, you kind of see it like a sense of hesitancy of like, I think I can hit him, but if I get too close, they might legitimately call a flag, even if it's not. And obviously, Mahomes is aware of it, whether he admits it or not. He knows that, he gets those favorable calls, and he uses that to his advantage because he's a smart player. And so I think that allows him to have a little bit more calmness in the pocket and be able to make those throws downfield. I want to hit on the 4th and 1 that Buffalo had around midfield halfway through the fourth quarter. It looked to me like Josh Allen got it. One official had him past the first down marker. The other official had him behind the line. I thought even after the review, that was obvious to me that he was past the first down marker. Do you have different thoughts on that, or?
Yeah, that was like another one where, as far from like an officiating perspective, I feel like you can see it either way. I'm in the same boat. I thought he got it. The thing that I thought was like the most egregious about it was that the initial spot from the judge that was probably facing Josh Allen so that could see the ball the best was awful. Terrible. It was terrible. They had him like a yard short, which if he was short, it was centimeters. It was centimeters or it was inches. And it was just one of those things where I was like, that was just awful. When he came in, I was like, how did the judge who was looking at the back of Josh Allen have a better sense of where the ball was than he did?
The part that kills me is that, obviously the two officials, they come running in from each side of the field. And so the one official's like halfway between the line of scrimmage and the first down marker. And the other official is, half a foot past the first down marker. And he runs at a 45-degree line, negative incline, into the pile. Like he's past the first down marker on the sideline. And by the time he gets to the line of scrimmage, he had run, a full yard backwards towards the pile, which, who knows what that really affects. But to me, it was just, I thought he got it. I thought it was obvious that he got it. Even Romo and Nance, and I think it's Pereira or whoever the, referee analyst that they bring in, all three of them were like, yeah, I think he got it. And for them to come out and say that he didn't, it was just frustrating, especially as someone who was rooting against the Chiefs pretty heavily in that one. I just think that at this point, it's to be expected that Kansas City's going to find a way to win. Like if we get to the Super Bowl and there's 5 minutes left and it's a tied game, I just, how do you not bet on them to get it done in the end?
It's just one of those things where it's in the same way that you talked about, like where the defensive linemen are kind of like hesitant and things like that. Like so much of and we'll get into those picks later, so much of my brain wants to go like Eagles, because that roster is just insane. But like I picked the Bills because I was like, it just felt like this Chiefs team all year has just barely squeaked by. And it's like at some point you're going to get caught. And they just don't. And it's just, I don't get it. I don't know how they keep winning these games.
I was on the same page with the Bills. I just felt like, like what you said, when a team has been consistently winning by very narrow margins, eventually that catches back up to them. A lot of times you see that in college football. But in this case, no one has really been able to beat Kansas City this year. They lost 2 games in the regular season. The last one, they didn't play anyone.
Didn't count.
So, you chalk that up to the one Buffalo loss in Buffalo. They turn around and beat them the AFC Championship game. And just the fact that they've been able to do this all year long, you have to give credit where credit's due. One of the things that stood out to me, at least just personnel-wise and how Kansas City has played this year, is that they're able to adapt their game plan and how they play based off who they bring in from season to season. When Mahomes was younger and you had Kelsey when he was a little bit more explosive and you had Tyreek Hill and the running game maybe wasn't as effective, there was a lot of these long developing plays and you see explosive passes down the field for 40 and 50 yards. And obviously they've had some issues with wide receivers and they're bringing guys in and out of there, but now they have guys like Xavier Worthy and they pick up Juju Smith-Schuster and they get some of these guys that are effective, and now it just turns into these short little routes where they're picking up 6 or 7 yards and they're just kind of taking these chunk plays down the field. They're way more reliant on the run game now, especially with Kareem Hunt, who feels like he's been on the Chiefs 4 separate times. He's just always there when the playoffs roll around.
Chiefs and Browns.
Just goes back and forth every time. I never remember what team he's on. And so I feel like a lot of that credit has to go to Andy Reid and just the organization of being able to adapt, knowing, hey, we're not going to be able to be as explosive as we would like, so we're going to just change our entire scheme to the point where we're just going to take chunk yards and we're just going to chew up the clock, because 4 or 5 years ago when they were first starting to have success, that's not really who they were.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And tonight the thing that really stood out to me is that Andy Reid, at his core, is like a West Coast system guy, which is based on these crossing routes and these really interesting concepts in the passing game. And this year, his offense has been smash mouth. Even tonight, I thought if this game turned into a fist fight, I had more confidence in the Bills because you have a defensive head coach on the other side. You have a defense that flies around. You have a quarterback on the other side that's willing to lower his shoulder. And at the end of the day, it was Patrick Mahomes lowering his shoulder, getting 2 rushing touchdowns. In the end, it was getting the ball to Kareem Hunt and Pacheco and even Piron and just being like, we're going to out-physical you. Our offensive line is going to look better. And it goes back to that investment that they've made in guys like Joe Tooney and Creed Humphrey and just really like pushing the line of scrimmage. And really the Bills did not tackle well. I think about a play, I think it was pretty early in the game where they had Kareem Hunt far back in the backfield, like 3-yard loss. Ed Oliver's got him. He just slips right through 2 yards. And those are the things that these teams that don't beat the Chiefs don't capitalize on those moments. And the Chiefs always do. And someone's got to be able to capitalize on those moments to beat them.
Just to add on to that, there are a couple sequences that happened earlier in the game, and I had it in my notes when I was watching the game, is Buffalo decided to go for 2 twice. The first time they do that QB sneak with Josh Allen, which I get the analytics of that say, if a team jumps off sides or they get a penalty on, the extra point, then you go for it because you're at the 2 and the chances of getting that are higher than just kicking, the extra point or whatever it is. So I understand that. And then obviously they go for 2 once again to, I think, make it a 3-point game or whatever it was. And as much as I understand that and I respect the aggressive approach, if you just take the 2 extra points there, that's a different game because ultimately Kansas City ends up winning by 3. If you're down 1 and you're Buffalo and you get it with 3:30 left to play in the game, that probably changes your play calling a little bit, just knowing you need a field goal. You have Tyler Bass, whatever it is, who's been super great all year. Obviously, he had the miss last year against Kansas City, but he's been money from 50 yards out, so you don't even have to get that far down the field. And obviously, Buffalo just wasn't able to get it done there at the end of the game. Last thing I want to hit on before we move on from the Chiefs is, we're both big Patriots guys. Mahomes is 1 win away from winning 3 in a row. What does he have to do to achieve GOAT status?
I mean, I think for him to get to the GOAT status, obviously the 3-peat's going to be a huge thing because that's something Brady never did. But I think it's important that for him to surpass Brady, you have to surpass the Super Bowl wins. Yeah. So he's got to get to 8. And the reason I say that and the reason I say he can't get it at 7 is that Brady can sort of forever hold it over him that, I guess, in that moment of explosiveness and he beat him. Whether it was in New England, that's that second year in Patrick Mahomes' career, or in the Super Bowl, he beat him. And since you couldn't beat Brady, you got to get more Super Bowls.
Yeah, I was right there with you. I was talking to some of my friends that, aren't Chiefs fans, but they're Patriot haters. And I pretty much grew up with those people my entire childhood, especially, being from Oregon, you never run into Patriots fans. And so for me, first thing first, you definitely have to eclipse the 7 Super Bowls. I think that's going to be tough to get, especially when you think of all the success that Mahomes has already had in the postseason. And they showed this stat at the end of the game. I don't know if you saw it, but it was most playoff wins. And Mahomes is at 17 and Brady's at 35.
Which is crazy.
So Mahomes would basically have to have all the success that he's already had in his career, even if he wins the Super Bowl, and double it.
Yeah.
Which I'm not saying it's not possible. I think it definitely is, but he's only going to get older from here. Who knows how many years Andy Reid or Travis Kelce have left. And at that point, we've seen elite quarterbacks struggle to win big games due to coaching or due to the players around them. I mean, we see that with Lamar. We see that with Josh Allen and Joe Burrow, guys of that nature. And so as much success as they are having now, I think there's a little concern about just where they go forward once we see guys like Reid and Kelce kind of take off. Let's jump into our...
I just had one more play calling question I wanted to get your thoughts on. So you talked a little bit about kind of those quarterback sneaks. Obviously, we talked about the really close one, and then some of their decisions kind of goal line offensive wise. Even that James Cook touchdown, I mean, that's the best effort you will see.
Yeah.
And the thing that really was, I guess, frustrating to me and for Joe Brady is that look across the field and see how the other team is picking up 4th downs. I love Josh Allen. I love that he's this huge guy that you can, get a good push on and he'll get that first down. But the Chiefs seem to pick up every 4th down, and it's because they run that rollout action with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
And he can either throw it or he can run it. And it's you can't tell me Josh Allen can't run that play. And so it's super frustrating.
And Buffalo ran that towards the end of the game. It was the 4th quarter. I think it was the drive that they scored a touchdown on to tie it up. And they ran that on like a 2nd and short, and he dumped it off to James Cook, and it was like a 25-yard gain. So I don't see why you can't do that, later in the game. And we've seen this with teams a lot. It almost feels like every time you get to 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, you're putting 8 guys on the line. You get the tight end and back behind the QB, and you're just pushing. And, the success rate is pretty high, but at some point, whether it's a rule change or, defensive adjustments, that's not going to work every single time. So like you said, being able to be creative with especially with a team like Kansas City, if you have a mobile quarterback and running backs that can get out and be explosive in the flat, I think that's something that we should see a lot more of. Let's get into our Super Bowl predictions. We have a Chiefs-Eagles rematch. They faced off a couple years ago down in Arizona. Imagine this questionable call to end the game, pass interference there on Philly, set up the Kansas City field goal, and Mahomes got his, I think that was his 2nd Super Bowl at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so we have a rematch here. I think, the teams, even though the quarterbacks are similar, the coaches are the same, we're going to see a lot of the same faces on the field, but I think these teams are two, completely different squads, like we talked about with Philly, obviously bringing in Saquon and A.J. Brown. They weren't in the last matchup, so it'll be interesting to see how those guys look in their Super Bowl debuts. I'm really excited for Saquon. I'd love to see him get a ring. I want to lean towards the Eagles in this one. Obviously, the hatred for Kansas City plays a part in that, but at the same time, I just think that teams have had success running the ball against Kansas City, and even today, Buffalo had a little success with James Cook and Josh Allen in the running game. I'd like to lean towards Philly, but it's just so hard to bet against Kansas City.
Yeah, and looking at Kansas City, and the thing that I think for me was like, oh no, when I was watching that game today was, for all season, my thing has been, well, what are the Chiefs going to do when they don't have their weapons, right? When they don't have a guy like Tyreek Hill and they don't have some of those dynamic players. But it looks like Juju Smith-Schuster is becoming a more dynamic player for them. And Xavier Worthy's becoming a more dynamic player. He's less of a gadget, get him open. And, whether that was a confirmed full catch or not, like that was still a pretty huge play for him to at least make an argument for, which you don't usually see from him. And then if you look at those two guys as like your sort of pseudo 1 and 2, then DeAndre Hopkins is your 3. And then guys like Noah Gray and Travis Kelce are fitting in there too. And it's just a lot to stop. And so a Chiefs offense that I thought was at the beginning of the year was like their weakest as far as talent-wise coming in, now looks extremely strong. And what was it? Did they get Hopkins for like a 5th round pick?
Yeah, for like a bag of chips. I forgot he was playing for them. I was watching the game. I was like, who is this guy with the dreads and the long hair? And they gets a catch or whatever, and I see the back of his jersey. And I was like, oh yeah, he's in Kansas City. Like so random.
But I think the most important thing is, I'm gonna pick the Chiefs because earlier in the week I said if the Bills can't beat the Chiefs are gonna win. As much as that hurts my heart to say, but and it's the same thing I said last week. If you play well on special teams, if you don't make the special teams mistakes, if you don't get the personal foul penalties, which the Bills got like a few of those in this game, if you can avoid the stupid mistakes, you're going to be very successful. Now, is it Jalen Carter, the defensive lineman? I'm so worried because he's such a
I was just thinking about that.
He's such a dynamic player, right? And he's probably their best defensive player. And if he can keep a cool head, like I think I'm having guys talk crap to him all week, 100%. Really try to get into his head and be like, this is what it's going to be like. Because if he's on his A game and he doesn't make those kind of costly mistakes, then the Eagles are going to have a chance. Because the thing that we've seen all year with the Chiefs is that with 4 or 5 minutes left, they're going to give you just as much of a chance as you're going to give them, right? And so it's about, can you execute when it's that 20-24 or 23-20? Like, can you get that next score to put the pressure on them? And I think the Eagles can, but I just can't pick against Patrick Mahomes. It's the magic. It's the voodoo magic.
I don't blame you. I don't know if I trust Jalen Hurts, and this goes back to what we were talking about a little bit. There's certain games where he looks good on his legs and he's getting the ball out quickly. I think even Brady was talking about this in the broadcast today, but when he sits back there for anywhere from 4 or 5 seconds and he just has time to drop back and think about it, that's when things start to go south for him. He's got to get that ball out quick. He has to be able to see what the defense is giving him before the ball is even snapped. And when you have guys like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, you don't have to do too much. Just try and get the ball to those guys. Don't be the hero. Play your brand of football. Be aware of the fact that you have Saquon Barkley in the backfield with you. So even if he's not running the ball, he can be just as effective in the passing game. So I don't want to see Hurts try to be a hero and make all these crazy plays down the field. I want to see him convert on these second and mediums, on these 3rd and 8s, and just be able to get the ball to his playmakers. And I think if they can do that, then they'll be able to have success running the ball, which I think they're going to have regardless with how great Saquon has been this year. And then defensively, like you said, I think they're going to have to be disciplined up front, which is the case for any team that plays Kansas City. Their offensive line is really strong, and then obviously we know what Mahomes can do. The thing that is going to be really interesting for me, and I don't want to get too political here, but you have Reed Blankenship and Cooper DeJean, like we talked about, the exciting wides, going up against some of the fastest receivers in the league in Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy. And that's just going to be a really exciting matchup. I think Cooper DeJean is going to have his hands full. I'm going to be rooting for him as a member of the white cornerback community, 5th and 6th grade defensive player of the year, actually, right here. So
Baller.
Really need Coop to represent us. I think it's going to be fun to watch just how this Eagles secondary, matches up with this, the weapons of Kansas City, because of the fact that we've seen this Philly this Philly secondary make plays all year. We've seen them make interceptions. We saw them force fumbles today against some, elite running backs and wide receivers that the Commanders had. And so as much as I lean towards, the Eagles defensively, like you said, there's just something about the Chiefs that, they're more disciplined. I think in the bigger moments, they're going to be more loose and relaxed than the Eagles will be. So for that reason, I'm also going to side with Kansas City. For now, there's a good chance I change my pick by next week. Luckily, we have 2 weeks to decide.
That's true.
But yeah, I like the Chiefs as well as this one. I also think the pressure's on Nick Sirianni as well. I think that, as a coach, you want to be calm, you want to be relaxed. I like a coach that, cares and shows that he cares, but at some point there's a line between that. And I think sometimes Nick Sirianni tends to go back and forth over that line. And, Andy Reid, he's going to be sitting over there. He's going to have his mustache and he's just going to be dicing up some nasty play calls. And I just don't know if I trust Sirianni to have that same level of discipline and consistency with his coaching.
Yeah, and I think, that's the other thing that worries me is that the key to beating this iteration of the Kansas City Chiefs is to not beat yourself. And Sirianni is an emotional coach who's probably taking an emotional team into the Super Bowl. And when you play the Chiefs, you almost have to take the emotions out of it. You have to just play a really solid football. The old Belichickism, you just have to go in there and you have to do your job. You can celebrate at the end, like you can be emotional after, but it's just not the place when you play the Chiefs. And I think when I look at how this Eagles team can win, right, is that this season they've done a great job of running the ball, that center guard or guard tackle, and they really don't run Saquon outside a lot. He has those big runs, but it's bouncing them out, or with Jalen Hurts, it's him bouncing them out. And I think if you can consistently get that, you can kind of suck some of those linebackers in, maybe bring some of those safeties up. And then what I've really liked is, we talk about Devontae Smith and we talk about A.J. Brown, but over the last couple of weeks, it's been Dallas Goedert. And so if you can get Dallas Goedert the ball, especially in the screen game, or those quick outs, the dude can level some punishment. And I can't remember who the Packers player was, but he has a lot to say about that because I watched him get stiff-armed for 10 straight yards. And so I think if they can get Dallas Goedert the ball and give him the opportunity to run in the open field, that's the thing is people try to play the Chiefs at their own game, and it's don't play your game. And if the Eagles can play their game calm and collected, they're more talented. They just are. Obviously the Chiefs have the all-important player, but the Eagles are just more talented. If you look up and down that roster, it's just not even close.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. I think it's kind of that, it's that back and forth between, and we see this a lot in all various types of sports, but you have the more talented team that can be a little bit more inconsistent, maybe a little bit more hot-headed, emotional, like we talked about. Then you have that team who has been there before. On paper, they don't look as dangerous as they truly are. We saw it with some Patriot teams back in the day as well. So I think that makes for a really interesting matchup. Before we get out of here, we're both big Patriot guys, like we talked about. kind of got announced last week that Vrabel's back in town. He brings Josh McDaniels with him. We talked about that this off on the phone a little bit this week.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Josh McD being back in Foxborough?
You see, my dad's a huge Raiders fan, and so he was giving me the whole like Josh McDaniels is a cancer thing. And sure, the head coach Josh McDaniels, a leech, terrible, awful, just not good. But the Josh McDaniels that has developed quarterbacks and has done things in New England, like he's going to bring like a whole bigger playbook to this offense. We're looking at a guy who Mac Jones made a Pro Bowl with him, and if you watch Mac Jones this year, that's a pretty huge achievement. And I think he's going to be able to use Drake in a lot of creative ways. I think if he had only ever been the offensive coordinator for Brady, I'd be really worried. But we've seen him not only be the offensive coordinator with a guy like Brady and a guy like Mac, but as you and me both remember fondly, those first like 4 weeks of Cam pre-COVID, Cam was cooking.
Yeah.
Like he was playing really well. And not saying that Drake May is Cam Newton, but I think you can mix a lot of those Tom Brady concepts and those Cam Newton concepts that'll really help this team be successful. And hopefully he can do things like he can unlock Polk and he can get Booty out on the outside making plays. Because I think there's guys on this offense that can make plays, even like a Demario Douglas. And so there's untapped potential. If we can just get an offensive line and get things moving, we might be able to actually have an impact.
And even just adding on to the coaching fact there for a minute is, McDaniels, we've seen him have success. Obviously, anytime Tom Brady's on your team, that's going to help. But like you said, yeah, Mac Jones was with him, and he made a Pro Bowl with Josh McDaniels as the offensive coordinator. And to go back to Vrabel for a second, I think people forget that this was a guy who had Ryan Tannehill looking like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, at one point, I think he was considered like top 5 in MVP voting when they had that run and then beat the Patriots in Brady's last game, and then they went and beat the Ravens when Baltimore was the 1 seed. And so this guy knows how to take, a team that's maybe less talented and maximize their potential. And with a young quarterback and with young weapons, as we continue to build the offensive line and build that wide receiving core, I think things can be special. Now, the first, year or two, I think you're going to continue to see development. And I think about year 3 or 4 is where we're really going to see things pop.
Yeah.
So I'm patient, but I'm also very excited at the same time. That is going to wrap it up.
Wait, can I ask you one more question?
Let's do it.
So me and you obviously are going to have to launch full scale into our NBA content here pretty soon, because it'll be the one sport that we got. And so as a huge Heat fan, I don't know if you've given your take as much. Are you standing with Jimmy, your guy, like took you to 2 finals, put him on your back, or are you standing with Mr. Heat Culture, Pat Riley?
I haven't. I'm so glad you asked this question. I haven't been able to give my 2 cents on this. I've been pretty indulged in college football playoffs and NFL Super Bowl stuff now, obviously too. But I am actually team Jimmy on this one. I'm very anti old owners who are out of their prime that still think they know how to operate things. Pat Riley has done some great things. Don't get me wrong. He signed LeBron. He signed Chris Bosh. He pulled Jimmy out of Philly, and we somehow made a finals after having Goran Dragic and Josh Richardson do like nothing for 4 or 5 years. No disrespect to Goran Dragic. Love the Dragon, but
he was old.
But he was old, and he was carrying our team. And so, Riley's done some great things, but Jimmy took us to 2 finals that we had no business being in. I know we pretty much got blown out in both of those series. I was actually there the one game we won in Denver. And if it's not for Jimmy, none of that is possible. We're looking at a team that is in the play-in tournament every year, which we're in the play-in tournament with him anyways, so it's kind of some, back and forth if you want to make that argument. But you're looking at a team that's just kind of hanging out with Bam and Tyler and is excited about a second-round appearance every now and then, rather than 2 finals appearances. One of my buddies back home is a huge Heat fan as well, and for years it's been, are we going to get KD? Are we going to get Bradley Beal? I heard Donovan Mitchell might be on the market.
Legend.
And it's just never happened. And so I don't blame Jimmy. I understand both sides. If I'm, the front office for Miami, I don't want to pay Jimmy $1 billion to, play 40 games a year
and hopefully turn up in the playoffs.
Hopefully, drop 40 every game. I mean, we've seen it happen before, but the chances of that being consistent is slim to none. But on the same time, I think if you're Jimmy, you want to be rewarded for what you've done. And I agree with him. I think he does need to be paid that contract, not because of what he's going to do, but because of what he has done. We saw the same thing happen when Dwayne Wade was in town. He left for Chicago and then he went to Cleveland. And in reality, you should have just paid him, kept him in Miami. Same thing with Jimmy here. He at least keeps you in competition for an Eastern Conference Finals appearance. He keeps you out of the play-in tournament most years. I think it's going to be sad to see him go. I hope for both sakes, I think we just let him go. Hopefully trade him off to Phoenix or wherever he wants to go and kind of just let him ride into the sunset. But it is pretty unfortunate as a fan just knowing that, things probably aren't going to be great for the next 2 or 3 years. I know Tyler's had an amazing year. Bam has been up and down. So hopefully we get some, whether it's draft capital or some superstar back, just to be competitive. But I'm Team Jimmy for sure.
Yeah, I've had a tough time with this because I can be kind of an old head sometimes. The older I get, the more I find myself siding with the owners, which I know is terrible. Because if you make enough money to own an NBA team, the likelihood of you being a good person morally is just really low. But the thing that I don't agree with Pat Riley's sentiment towards when he makes it towards Jimmy Butler. But the overall sentiment, I think, is important for the overall NBA conversation, especially with some of their ratings problems and things like that, is this idea that we have a lot of NBA players that I think sign contracts and then they're like, whatever, trade me. And you're like, I just signed you for 4 years 3 months ago. And so I think the NBA needs to get some of that under control, but Jimmy Butler necessarily isn't the best example for that. Maybe make it on Zion.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I think it's just sad. I understand that side too. I've thought about that. I like I said, I wouldn't necessarily pay Jimmy the max if I was the GM, but also understand Jimmy wanting to be paid. He hasn't necessarily gotten the help that he was told he was going to get, and so I get that as well. Any final thoughts?
I just real quick, just because I love to talk anytime I have a platform. I want to call out Kyle Kuzma. Your listeners probably don't know that I'm a Wizards fan, which is
you might be the first.
I think I am the only one. Kyle Kuzma the other day made a quote about how he doesn't necessarily, the gist was that he's going to start doing his own thing because he doesn't want to, he's not fit to play on a developmental team. Keep in mind, this is the guy who there was a trade lined up for and said he wanted to be a part of creating something big in Washington. And we're about less than a year since that quote, and he's growing impatient, which, here's my thing with Kuzma. I love Jordan Poole. I'll say it. I love him. He plays hard, maybe not on defense, but on offense, he gives it his all. And that's all you can really ask for. He's letting the young guys play. Trade Kyle Kuzma. Get him out of there. Start Kispert. I don't care. Anything I can do to get Cooper Flag in a Wizards jersey is music to my ears. But I think actually us keeping Kyle Kuzma keeps those odds higher. So
I think I saw that Koulibaly had a cool dunk the other night. That's exciting for you guys.
Yeah, mostly it's like the Drake May sensation is that I wanted the Patriots to lose every single game this year, but if Drake May looked good and they lost by 3, it was perfect.
Yeah.
So when I see the Wizards and I'm oh, they lost by 8, I'm awesome. There was a game the other day where they lost by 35 and I was we need to not have as many of those. But they have some promising rookies. I don't know. I mean, I think I've resigned myself to the fact that it's going to be a while till I get to be a fun NBA fan. Right now, I just get to be the one that's Cavs are cool.
You guys got to draft a prospect who is American made. You guys are the the fancy people now these days who like to get out of their American culture and they like to go try sushi and then next night they're going to Thai food. You need some American corn-fed grass beef American basketball player like a Cooper Flag. Stop going to France. Stop going to Spain. There's not good basketball there. Good basketball is in America. This is what we own. We don't own much anymore, but basketball is one of those things. We proved that a couple months ago. We own basketball. Give back to drafting USA people.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I've seen how at the beginning of the year, it's always like there's all these prospects in college that you're supposed to watch that are going to get picked high in the draft. And you're like, cool, there's this guy, this guy, this guy. And then like slowly throughout the year, there's like some guy that you can't pronounce his name who slowly like is inching up the list. And they're like, he's like a 6'10" shooting guard. He can't dribble well, but like that's a skill that he'll pick up in the NBA. And you're like, please don't draft that guy.
My favorite is, this is just to add on to that, is they'll be like, pros, really athletic. Cons, struggles to dribble, pass, and shoot, and it's just, and he goes like number 3 overall.
Just learned basketball 3 days ago.
It's the best. It never gets old with the NBA draft.
And there's like the 2 guys. So there's Cooper Flagg, and then there's the 2 guys at Rutgers, because I think one of them is it Ron Harper's son?
Yeah.
And so like those are like 3 good guys, because like obviously Cooper Flagg, you know, he lit up the Team USA scrimmage, and that's great. And I would love to have Cooper Flagg, but this year's draft seems pretty deep. So if you can get one of the guys from Rutgers, or you know, just I like Coulibaly, I like Sarr, I like Bub Carrington. Like they've got a lot of guys that like later on maybe a championship team that you would be like, that's a great 4, that's a great, you know, really solid big man, that's a good guy off your bench. Go get me a guy who can go get a bucket in a Big East game or in a March Madness tournament game, and that's all I want.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is a lot of these guys, like, you know, yeah, that's great they're playing pro ball in Paris, but have they had to go on the road to UConn or Tennessee and go win, you know, a game on the road where you're an underdog? I don't know that you can say that about a lot of these
Dan
guys.
Hurley just screaming in your ear.
Yeah, I mean, you're not getting that in Spain. I mean, maybe in some of those environments, but you're not getting that consistently unless you're here in the States. Well, that's going to be a fun way to wrap it up. Appreciate you coming on. It's always a good one here with Kaleb. If you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe, share. As the spring continues on, we're going to get into more NBA, March Madness stuff. We'll be sure to have Kaleb on more to share some thoughts on his Wizards, whatever happens about the trade deadline. And we're just going to keep giving you guys good content. Let us know in the comments what you guys like, and we'll catch you later. Do you want to shout out your stuff first?
Yeah. Me and Carter, we're going to do some more NBA content for sure. We got a little Russillo Simmons vibe, I think, cooking. We're not going to talk about the Wizards that much. I just want you guys to know that. We will talk about the teams.
It doesn't help the views
that actually play on TV. It might be like one person's like, yeah, I'd love to check out the Wizards. But yeah, so check out my stuff's all on QuadCulture. It's music, movies, TV, sports. So if you want to check out all that different stuff, we're running into Oscar season, and you know there's some whack movies that no one's ever heard of getting nominations. And so if you want to hear what those movies are about, I can tell you. But check out QuadCulture. We're on YouTube, Instagram, and then we got a little blog cooking.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's gonna wrap it up. Like I said, he's Kaleb. I'm Carter. Go check out QuadCulture. Go check out Chop It Up, and we'll catch you guys later.
Deuces.
Good stuff.